Rosendale of Montana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 847, the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my amendment number 92 would prohibit funding for President Biden's new Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Since President Biden took office in January 21, our Second Amendment rights have been under an assault. And now, with the stroke of a pen, President Biden created the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, allowing his administration to bypass Congress unilaterally and implement the left's gun control agenda. This office would be overseen by Vice President Kamala Harris and staffed with radical former gun control lobbyists, allowing the swamp to have total control of the Biden's gun control agenda. In Montana, 64% of the households have firearms, and Montanans will not go along with the White House attempt to undermine our Second Amendment rights. People often say, what are they afraid of out there in Montana? Why do they need so many firearms? I will tell you, we're not afraid of anything. And it's because we do have our firearms. It's unacceptable for the hard-earned tax dollars of gun owners in Montana to fund the salaries of unelected, gun-grabbing bureaucrats who are hell-bent on branding law-abiding, responsible gun owners as criminals. My amendment would throw a wrench in the gun control lobbyists' plans and severely hamper the Biden administration's ability to impose further restrictions on our Second Amendment rights. It's time we drain the swamp and kick the gun control lobby out of the White House. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this senseless amendment. The White House Gun Violence Task Force is committed to treating gun violence as the public health crisis it is. By approaching this issue from a public health perspective, the task force aims to reduce the staggering number of deaths and injuries caused by firearms in the United States. The task force emphasizes the importance of data-driven and evidence-based policy decisions that will create solutions that balance the rights of law-abiding gun owners with the need for public safety. Mr. Chair, as a gun owner myself, I tell you that task force seeks to enact common-sense gun safety measures that the majority of Americans support. These include background checks for all gun sales, closing the gun show and online sale loopholes, and implementing red flag laws temporarily to disarm individuals who pose a danger to themselves or others. I strongly oppose this amendment, and I do urge a no vote. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've referenced, VP Harris possesses no special credentials to run the Office of Gun Violence Prevention and will act as nothing more than a figurehead. The office will rely on left-wing special interests and lobbyists to enact the Democrats' war on the Second Amendment while also rewarding President Biden's donors with cushy jobs at the White House. Rob Wilcox, the Deputy Director of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, led federal policy at Everytown for Gun Safety, which is primarily financed by Michael Bloomberg. All the time that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are trying to undermine and compromise our Second Amendment rights, they fail to recognize the prosecutors that they have put in place around the country that refuse to charge and prosecute the criminals that should not have guns, that have been doing crimes with illegal firearms. That's where the focus needs to be. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Chair, at this time I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to this amendment to eliminate the White House Office on Gun Violence Prevention, which President Biden took historic action to create. This year, there have been more shootings than days in the year. It's been a deadly year, and that's why the American people want to see us take action, not tear down the simple efforts they're owed. But my colleagues aren't listening to the American people. They're listening to the gun lobby. They're listening to the gun manufacturers, the gun lobby that emailed everyone about this amendment that we're debating right now, saying they endorse against any politician who votes with common sense. An email filled with pure hyperbole saying that this office was made to take guns away. This office is not created to take guns away. It's created to save lives. The American people fear for their safety. It should be more important than Republican politicians' fear for their careers. How many more dreams need to be extinguished until we say enough is enough? And the swamp/radicals that we're referring to are people like Greg Jackson, a survivor of gun violence who was shot not too far from this chamber and fought for his life in the hospital, almost died due to senseless gun violence, and has committed his life to saving all of our lives. I'm offended that someone would call him or Rob Wilcox, another survivor of gun violence, the swamp. The White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention will save lives, and voting no means trying to eliminate a FEMA-like response for communities after shootings and the coordination of gun violence prevention programs that will save lives. I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, what my colleagues fail to recognize time and time again is the fact that we have so much crime that takes place, criminal on criminal, or criminals committing these crimes, and a crossfire, an innocent victim gets tied up in it. And they also refuse to recognize that these communities and cities that are led by Democrat leaders have had increased crime rates over the last several years since the Biden administration has taken over. And that is because they have prosecutors that are not charging and prosecuting these criminals and letting them off without proper punitive measures taking place. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to Mr. Frost of Florida.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
My colleagues on the other side of the aisle will make this about criminal on criminal activity. This office, one of the core tenets of the office, is for community violence intervention. One of the only such programs in our country that go into communities, find out people who are most likely to shoot someone and people who are most likely to be shot, create relationships and intervene before the violence happens. So this office is working to solve exactly the problem that you just iterated. And so I hope if you'll follow your own logic, if my colleagues follow their own logic, that they'll vote no on this amendment so we can save lives across the entire country. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves.
We oppose the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Montana is recognized for 1.5 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to finish up by saying, forgive me if I don't trust a federal agency to be policing a community and using their discretion about who may or may not be committing a crime in the future. My gosh, we have just witnessed the FBI conducting surveillance on Catholics because they are attending Latin masses. We watched them conduct surveillance on parents because they dared attempt to attend school board meetings. And now we are going to unleash the federal agencies to conduct surveillance on people who might own a firearm, who may not own a firearm, who might commit a crime in the future, and they are going to be the sole judge of that. The people across Montana will not support that. They will not tolerate that. And this amendment deems to get rid of an agency that's trying to do those exact kind of acts. I ask my colleagues to please support this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Montana. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Chair, I demand a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Montana will be postponed. It is now in order to consider